Hi, my name is Brinson, and this is a project I gotta do for a class that I'm in college because I want a better life for myself. So I'm trying to educate myself a little bit more. But that's really it all for this video's purpose. But either way, I'm doing this project on death of a salesman. Now the point of this project is to have a position or point to with the story, and in this case I came up with the question: is Willie, the main character, or I guess the main bad guy, a bad guy? Is he the villain of the story? Is Willie the antagonist to everyone else? Now, if you haven't read the story, let me start with the story itself. Like the title states, it's about a death of a salesman, in which this case it's Willie. And it's his slow descent into realizing that his life isn't what it made out to be. Is what it made out to be. Ending, mind you, granted most of these stories we've been reading in class is very depressing. And I don't like to be depressed. I like to be a happy man myself. But what are you gonna do? Anywho, so let's start off with the character himself, Willie. Who is he? Why is he the way he is? And is his actions considered bad, good, neutral, or whatever? Willie is, by extension of who he is, a working man who doesn't understand the world. His life view is, if you are well liked, you will prosper, which in some circles is a valid way to live, I guess. If you're a very influential person, you most likely will have a lot of people that like you, and you'll probably try to make people like you in response. Is that a good way to live? I don't think so. But for Willie, that's how he lives. And he's not a rich man, mind you. He's a very middle-class person. Maybe middle to lower class. He's in debt in the story. He travels for work. He does pretty much everything for this company that he works for. And in the story, he's been, I believe it's stated, he's been working there 20 years. So a good long time. And that's his perspective, that he must be liked in this company in order to get success. Now, we can't measure up Willie by himself. We have to include his family, which there are 3 members to the entirety of the family. There is his wife and his 2 sons, which is Happy and Biff. Now let's start with his wife. And his wife is an interesting miss, for the reason that she is amazingly supportive and just a little bit of a blind follower, if I'm being honest. What she does is that everything that Willie does that isn't exactly a positive thing or a thing that is progressing, she supports. In the very beginning of the story, Willie is having these flashes of lunacy where he can't maintain himself on the road. He keeps viewing out and seeing something else. A view, a landscape, something that he wants but can't really have. So he squares off the road and he tries to fix himself, and when he realizes, oh, I shouldn't be driving, he goes home, and his wife gives him all these excuses on why that is the way it is. She says, oh, it may be the tires, maybe the steering, maybe this, maybe that. And Willie just shrugs her off all the way. It's actually to a point where I think Willie doesn't really care too much for her, as he thought maybe he will be more well-liked with her, or that he liked that kind of support. It's kind of weird because she acts like a mom to her husband, if that makes sense, where she's just weirdly unendingly supportive. But that's his wife. And then his 2 sons are interesting because his wife has never really changed throughout the story. She's always been this blind, supportive figure, which is nice. But with his sons, they start off following him and living his idea of what life should be, and then towards the end, discovering, oh, maybe I should be doing something else. So in the beginning, when Biff and Happy are in high school, they're basically your average cliche of a jock. They don't study, they play football, They're very macho, very big, beefy, basically. And then there's one part in the story where a nerd type character comes up to him, comes up to Biff at his house and says, "Hey, you need to study. This math teacher's not going to pass you." And they can't accept that because they're so well liked. They think because they're so well liked, they are going to just succeed in school. Which, hate to break it to most people, that's not how that works. And this character, this nerd character, is just shrugged off because he isn't well liked. And in the book, it's even stated he's liked but not well liked, which doesn't help his case whatsoever. Now, however, when it's the present time, Biff and Happy are very different. In high school, Biff and Happy are very similar. They're both jock high schoolers, basically. But as adults, they get very different paths in life. Let's start with Biff. Biff is the only one I would consider in the story to be in the real world. He sees the world as it is and how it should be, rather than how Willie sees it, which is he wants to be liked. Biff just wants to work. He wants to work with his hands. In the story, he wants to buy a ranch and just work there, which is nothing wrong with that. It's actually a very noble job you can go for. However, Willie doesn't see it that way. Willie sees it as basically a throwaway. You're throwing away your life for this. You should be a salesman where you can be liked. Which is weird because a little while later he contradicts himself by saying he's still his favorite and still is proud of him. Which I suppose most parents would still be, even if they didn't agree with your life choices. But it is what it is. Now, Happy is a bit different for the fact that he's also kind of doing what he wants to do, but he's doing it in a little bit more of a self-destructive way. He is, in lack of a better words, sleeping around with rich and influential people's wives. That's not very good. Now, I'm not quite sure what Willie does. I think he's also in the sales industry, similar to his dad. But he isn't really being pushed to do anything else. He is literally just sleeping around, and that's it. And he really just keeps that attitude of douchiness from his high school years. And he shares a lot of similarities to his father, where he's almost disillusioned with the fact that he needs to be this in order to be happy. You don't need to be anything besides yourself to be happy. You don't need to be successful to be happy. You don't need to be well-liked to be happy. You don't need to be anything to be happy. You just gotta have to find your own path in life and be happy with that. Which, little life lesson for you. And then, Willie, I would consider, is a very interesting person because despite having a family, he doesn't consider that as sacred as his company. Now, his company is a sales company, and I'm not quite sure what they sell, but I just know they sell items. Obviously. Willie is like a father to this company. Not in the way that the company sees him as a parent, but Willie sees him as his kid. The company doesn't care about Willie whatsoever. Later in the story, he literally gets fired from this company, and Willie cannot accept it. This company Willie in this company is old enough to be seeing the employees as they were kids. Some of these employees he's literally seen as babies, and yet when they fire him, he can't understand it. Which, I don't know about you, definitely shows how little well-likeness can actually influence anyone. Because if you're well-liked, it doesn't mean you're immune from being fired, which Willie can't really accept. And that's the lesson of the story, is that being well-liked doesn't mean anything. Like I said before, it's you yourself who have to make yourself happy, but not by these means. It's very interesting because towards the end of the story, when Willie finally realizes this, he realizes he can't really change much anymore. He can't just snap his fingers and get the last bit of his life back, so he decides to off himself, sadly. Now, does this make Willie a bad guy? I don't think so. He puts in money for life insurance, and since it's known that he's been kind of drifting off with driving, he just goes off the road and dies. He gets the money, and he gives it to his wife and kids, as he should. Now, his wife pays off all his debts, and towards the end, she's a widow. Debtless, but a widow. His kids, however, go into very different paths. Happy is angry at the fact that his dad's dead, and he wants to make something of himself. So he throws himself into sales full-heartedly. And I think this is kind of a bad ending for him, because he kind of falls into the same trap that Willie did, where he can't wrap his head around what he should have done. Happy, however, is a bit different for the fact that he decides to continue with the ranch idea. He's going to do what makes him happy, and that is work with his hands, do things with his hands. He is working for himself, which he escaped that trap of needing to be well liked, and instead is doing something that he finds important. And that, in the end of the story, makes a whole melancholy ending a little bit more melancholy. And my thoughts towards the entire book, I liked it. Out of all of them, I didn't think it was that bad. It could have... there's some bits and pieces I thought should have been a little bit more clear, or should have been added a little bit more, or just this and that. Just basically nitpicking. It's a good story. I recommend it. It's Death by a Salesman by Arthur Miller. It was made in the 40s, I think, maybe the 30s. And for my thoughts on Willie, I don't think he's the bad guy, but I do think he's a victim of the world he created himself, where he surrounded himself by people who supported his illusion of grandeur, and then when he realized it was too late, it was too late. But yeah, good story, recommend it.